Hey guys, I just thought I'd make a real quick video for posterity. So basically, the Canadian government and the Chinese government are now working together, uh, sort of like in a sort of like turning a new page in history where you had this kind of Western colonial domination. And now there's sort of the recognition that, okay, BRICS are coming up. They're going to be the next superpower. We can feel the weight. And so basically Canada is of the opinion, look, we're just going to go and deal with the Chinese. We're going to see what we can trade to advantage our situations. They have 1.5 billion people. That's a nation that's hungry for resources. You've got Russia next door that could satisfy probably the vast majority of the resources. Canada has a lot of nice real estate. Canada has farmland. Canada has Chinese communities. So you think over the long run, you have all this room in Canada. In China, you've got room when you go west into the desert, but that hasn't been developed yet. Basically, you've got this eastern seaboard development. In Canada, you have much more sort of like natural terrain and like square footage. Like every person gets way more square feet per, just as an individual. In terms of what you can purchase. Like that's been you imagine how much land there is in Canada relative to the population. And so anyway, it's like you can imagine, you've got Asia, which has 3 billion people. It'll feel claustrophobic over there, even though you can build into the sky and eventually they'll have it figured out where it feels really like, that there's plenty of room, despite the fact there are billions of people over there. Yeah, people want to roam. People want to explore different parts of the world. They may want to live on the coast in BC because they don't get that from their home country. They may want to live in Toronto. They may want to live on the prairies near the mountains. It's just a question of having different options. And because you've got billions of people over there, they have all the industry, all the technology. They're going to be making all kinds of income and trade. And now with that money, what are they going to want to do? They're going to want to purchase land. They're going to want to purchase real estate. And so that's kind of where Canada is trying to position itself. It's trying to maintain itself as a destination for their money. Like we don't want to scare them off all of a sudden and be like, okay, you're winning all the manufacturing, so now that's just gonna, throw a wrench in our relationship, and now we can't be friends, and, prepare to defend yourself over Taiwan. It's like none of that shit. We understand the future, we understand the comparative advantages, and that's exactly what we're trying to exploit over the long run. And honestly, America has the same capacity. America has an even greater capacity to do that because it has greater population. It has a better weather, to do the same thing that Canada is doing, which is parceling off real estate, which can be almost infinite, in order for them to have a different experience in a different part of the world and make money off of that. And then, and the natural resources that we have in abundance that we can't possibly consume if we're doing everything energy efficient. But they need the resources. They're the ones with the billions of people. And so basically, Canada and America are on the same page with respect to the comparative advantages. And I think right now you have this window where Canada has a little bit of an autonomy, where it's able to do some moves without America telling Canada what to do. And honestly, this is going to be positive for America as well. America is going to see that it has a huge amount of advantages, and it's going to, it may imitate Canada's business model, which is to sell, natural resources and real estate as the strategy, as the long-term strategy to, in order to maintain that, in order to maintain the money that's coming in from Asia. We want the money from Asia to keep flooding into America, North America, because our industry is no longer here. We no longer are competitive with the world in our manufacturing. It all moved to Asia. When our capitalists picked up and moved the factories over there, it basically it took all the business from North America. The government didn't say anything, the people didn't push back, and that's the situation North America is in now. So we have to make the best use of our comparative advantage. It's not the technology, it's not the manufacturing. We are not a source of enlightenment, that we sensed we were. We are like, oh my God, we're on top of the world. We can tell the world how to live and how to behave and how to act and how to dress. And, you're going to have American culture like through the TVs all throughout the, world. It's like, yeah, no longer so much. I mean, people love Hollywood. People love Hollywood movies and all this, but it's like the idea that, Asian people don't have their own ideas or their, own sense of what's good for the world, culturally acceptable or fashionable or whatever. It's not true. They're going to come up with great music, great art. They'll be the trendsetters. They're going to be setting the trend for what's cool because the economy favors their nation. The people are looking to China for to answers for their problems. So now it's like, just naturally, it's like, it's one of those things. Well, I don't want to get off on too much of a tangent. I'm just trying to put it into perspective or try to put it into context as to this major shift that's happening for people to prepare for it. That, what is really being given up in this scenario. I think Donald Trump, he was afraid. He was like, as soon as you start selling off your real estate and your farmland, that's the beginning of the end. He sees this as a never-ending competition, as like adversaries that are that it's always about the battle. It's always about who's stronger. It's not about thinking, oh, hold on a second, we're a species, and basically, there's plenty of resources, and, what we need to take care of collectively is collective extinction. And so basically we're, the trend is not to be adversarial in this like empire sense. For the long run, we've reached a point of human development that takes us beyond that game. So in the early stages, kind of like John Mearsheimer, he talks about real, it even almost goes back to realpolitik, and that was Bismarck or something, realpolitik. And then you have Mearsheimer, you have the real world, something about real power politics, which is like everything is always like a zero-sum game, that you don't pay attention to the cooperative outcome, that the tendency is that you have empires that emerge and the empires are trying to battle each other for dominance. But my sense is that that's in the earlier stages when resources are scarce. So, when taking over people's land is going to yield more farmland, and yielding more farmland means your population can expand. In those days, in those early days, the risk-reward ratio was, you would have to risk something, but there was a reward. Today in warfare, if you risk the potential downside is apocalyptic. So it's like, oh my God, it's like you are risking way, 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 way more today in warfare for much less gain. Because if there was a war, everything would be destroyed. So it's like, and also it doesn't consider the fact that you can do 50 times as much with your own resources on your own land, given the acceleration of robotics, internet, and all this stuff, industrial capacity. So the idea that you need to expand in order to sustain yourself, like the Huns or something like that, is like, it just doesn't make sense. Look at what China's doing. It sits inside its in the confines of its nation, and it basically, has one base outside of China, doesn't do any military policing in the world, doesn't have any bases, anything, hasn't invaded any country, hasn't been at war since the 70s, hasn't dropped a bomb since the 70s, and America's dropped 7 bombs a day since the 70s. Every day, at least 7 bombs America has to be dropping somewhere in the world. This is like, you're comparing, this is the comparison of systems where you have one empire that thinks it's still in the kind of the British Empire era, where you had using force, using naval force and technology to kind of create room to sort of dislodge and break up empire by force, forcibly, like breaking up the enemy and dominating the enemy. Today, we're in a situation where the Chinese, they're just opening up trade to everybody. So they're putting up nations on their feet. They have all the technology. They're just developing themselves. They're not thinking colonial empire. They're thinking about trading empire. They're thinking about how do we set up all these different countries so that they're our friends. And then once they're on their feet, they're going to be trading with us because they're just so happy how we set them up, following their period of humiliation, and they immediately turned around and put that into our development. They're going to remember that kind of approach to global negotiation development. And it basically, and America is still in that mentality of we have to have colonies. So that's why we're going to Venezuela. That's why we're thinking, okay, let's take Greenland, and really what America needs to do is it needs to take that military industrial complex, retool it, and have it spend money on space. This endless money, this money machine that they just want to keep feeding, creating wars in order to create the justification for the weapons, is going to be, we take them out of the equation and tell them, hey, instead spend the money on space, where you're going to have a way bigger budget, where we're going to justify it to the people based on apocalyptic potential of an asteroid that'll, and the fact is that when we're spending all that money on space, it's going to come back because we're going to do space mining. The future is in space, so all this arms industry stuff needs to end, but you can keep your jobs. You can have even better jobs with the space industrial complex. So that's about where we're at with that in the world, and in America's relation to the world, basically how it can get itself out of this, sort of British Empire 2.0 composure. Because, until you deal with that aspect of it, America is always going to want to have the incentive to go and take over something. And then because it's doing that already, then it's creating the justification for reinforcing colonialism. But it doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. And, eventually you're going to see China come up, and the system that doesn't make sense kind of just appears ridiculous. So I think this reality is becoming clear, and that's why, during these major readjustments, you got to think about all that technology that just happened really quick. And you have to think about all that population that's in Asia. And you have to think about the big factors. Oh man, they need places to live. They need natural resources. Drop everything else for, let the pretense go, and think about space. Think about, hey, we're all one people in the world. And then we basically begin to readjust along those levels. The world really wants to become one people. It wants to become one nation. What's blocking it up is special interests, money wedges, some containment of resource, some guarding of resource, so they're fending other people off of it, and that creates a division. But in reality, what you need a global socialism. You need a global guarantee that every person in the world has some minimum. So I don't know how you do that. If you fund the United Nations, the United Nations has no budget. It has $2 billion a year as their budget. The budget of the U.S. government is what, 20 trillion? That's the GDP. The GDP of the U.S. economy is something like 25 trillion. And then you add the the government spends trillions a year, and that's just the US. And so if you're going to have a global government, you should have a global government that has a budget of trillions a year, and how it's using that money to guarantee a global socialism. And once you have that, and then you have one army. You make sure that the world, it consolidates its weapons of mass destruction into one army. So now you have one army, you have a federal government that's looking out for every person in the world as a last resort. And the focus now is space investment, that all the money that would have been going into militaries trying to offset one another is instead being pooled wisely into a space program that could save the world from apocalypse, which is a real potential. We're overdue from an Earth killer asteroid. We need to go into space to begin to mine space. We need resources from space in order to build space platforms, in order to exist in space, in order to get to the next solar system, in order to survive, in order to create the best conditions for survival of life. So, or Mars, or, basically getting off of Earth is a major project for people. People are all still in the same boat where we could be wiped out in an instant because we haven't worked together enough to create this survival program. So anyway, guys, I appreciate you watching this video. These are just some of the thoughts that I'm coming up with now. I think North America has a really good potential in the world. It's like, America doesn't have to see this as a Canada slighting America. This is just Canada taking an approach at, look, we see what America's doing, how it's like, it seems like America's always in motion. It's like this pressure of being in the first place. So now you're, it's always like, perform, get more. And so it's like, it's not taking the time to step back and appreciate, okay, what is the situation today? And the fact that Canada is here to have an independent policy to take its attempt at how it would do the foreign policy allows America time to step back and look and see, maybe it could be a different picture. Maybe America doesn't have to be all that. Maybe it doesn't have to create this, who's going to dominate the world, America or China. And, maybe it can be a helper along many more pages than trying to turn everything, than to try to retain this colonial empire status, that's like dressed up in the language of global freedoms and, rules-based order, America creating these delusional images that it's a policeman of the world that is loved by the world to create order and safety, and that it saved everybody in World War II, and that's the spirit of America. That is a component of America. There's no doubt about it. But today, what America means to all these developing countries since World War II is this British Empire 2.0 that basically has been exploiting them, keeping them underdeveloped in order to make money off of them. So they pretend to go in there to develop them, but instead they're setting them up to be part of the empire. And it's like the world is now rejecting this in favor of alternatives that are being provided by China. And so, yeah, it's just a rethinking of where the world is at. It's like it's a wonderful thing that China is coming up, because it creates the potential that America can now, instead of being some colonial power global policeman, it can drop all that. It doesn't have to be all that. It can bring all that in, all that spending, all those bases, wasted money, that doesn't really help America all that much. And then you bring all that money and you start pouring it into the infrastructure. You start spending it on the space program. Suddenly, and now you still have all the goods that are produced at a high quality at a low cost because of your positive trading relationship with Asia, and they're purchasing your real estate and your natural resources. To me, that's a much better position to be in. So, yeah, guys, it's click on the like and subscribe to my channel, and thanks for watching.